Obviously, the Duke blowing leads thing is a big deal. This is their second loss this year when they've lost a big lead, and I think it really only is a big storyline because Duke loses so infrequently.
So they're 38-3 in the last calendar year. And yes, 3 of those losses were games that they led by double digits. The other 38 games they led by double digits and they did not lose. So I think that that's a pretty good rate when it comes down to it.
Hey everybody, welcome to the EvanMiya College Basketball Show. I'm your host, Evan Miyakawa, and what a fantastic week of sports, and specifically for college basketball. There is a ton to get into today on the show. UNC beats Duke, greatest rivalry in the sport. This game always delivers. Michigan State beats Illinois at home in a big one. In Madison Square Garden on Friday night, St. John's knocks off UConn. We also had big wins for teams like Houston, Florida, and Kentucky. So super packed show today. Rob Dauster is on deck with me here in a second to talk about the weekend. And later on in the show, we've got Eamonn Brennan joining us to talk about some more games and do some early February bubble talk. And also in this week's Analytics Corner at the end, I'm going to highlight the teams that have been most impacted by injuries this year. And we may also go in depth on U.S. Olympic mixed doubles curling. Probably not, but we're going to have some fun today. If you are a listener of the show, please leave us a review on Apple or Spotify, or if you watch on YouTube, hit the subscribe button. It really helps us grow the show. All right, it is time to get into the big storylines from this week, and here with me to do that is the great Rob Dauster from the Field of 68. Dauster, there are so many places that we could start to recap this weekend, but I think we have to begin with Duke, North Carolina. The greatest rivalry in sports, in my opinion, delivers yet again. A final score, North Carolina 71, Duke 68 in Chapel Hill. And I think starting this game, it did not look like this was going to be a good game. Duke was up early, 18-5 in this game. But North Carolina slowly and surely clawed their way back in this game to eventually tie the game late. And we had a couple late sequences when both teams had a chance to go ahead. Ultimately, it ends with this North Carolina ball with 10 seconds left. Derek Dixon, the freshman, with the ball. He takes Cam Boozer into the paint. Defenders converge. He passes it to Seth Trimble in the corner, who hits the three to win the game. We have a court storm. We have some controversy around the court storm. So many storylines here. Dauster, what were some of your biggest takeaways from this incredible game?
Well, first and foremost, you got to give Jon Scheyer credit for being able to spin the narrative. You know, he's a young coach, but he's already figured out that if you say something about court storming in the press conference, that's what everyone's going to be talking about, instead of having to talk about maybe some of the late game offensive issues that your team has shown in a couple games this season. No, I think you have to give North Carolina so much credit for this. Being able to fight back against that team, being able to execute late against that team with how good Duke can be defensively. Derek Dixon, I still don't understand how he saw Seth Trimble in the corner, or how he was able to actually get the ball to him in the corner, making that pass over the length and the bodies that were in between them. The ability to knock down that shot if you're Seth Trimble. I mean, he's not necessarily the greatest three-point shooter in the world, but he shot that thing like he was Steph Curry in all by himself in an empty gym.
With the Steph Curry celebration too.
Yeah, he put him to sleep, man. It was awesome. It was, everything about that moment was great. Like I loved the fact that they were able to come back and win it. I love the fact that we kind of got the best out of the Caleb Wilson versus Cam Boozer matchup that we were all kind of hoping for. I think it's actually really significant too that the two guys, the questions that we've had about this North Carolina team, Evan, has been, do they have enough guards? Do they have point guard play? We know how good their bigs are. Is their backcourt good enough when you look at some of these other teams around the country? And the fact that the two guys that won the game for them were freshman Derek Dixon making that pass and senior Seth Trimble making the shot, I think says a lot about where this team is right now and what they can be moving forward. I still think they're a little bit flawed, but and frankly, I think that where they are ranked probably in the AP poll probably has them a little overinflated in terms of how good they are actually, if you look at some of the different metrics and all that. But I mean, at some point you just have to look at it and say a win is a win is a win, and they found a way to be able to get the win when they needed it, and they made the plays that they needed to when they needed to, and we got a great moment, man. Seth Trimble's going to be able to look back at that for the rest of his life. I wonder how many times he's watched that video on his phone.
I mean, yeah, if it were me, I would have watched it probably 100 times by now. I know I go back and watch highlights of myself from like rec soccer leagues as an adult. So, if I'm doing that, then I'm sure he is. I mean, that pass from Derek Dixon, I kind of watched this back several times because it looks like initially, I don't know if UNC got the look that they were wanting with that play. And then he just decides to take Cameron Boozer to the basket. And I think he was looking, you see 4 Duke defenders converge on him. I think he was looking to pass. And if you freeze it, he has Trimble open in the corner. He also has a cutting Caleb Wilson, who might be the more like obvious play there, but he's able to fling it across the court. And, Tremble hitting that shot, obviously big, but people have pointed this out. It's the setup from Dixon that I think is more impressive, especially considering that he's a freshman. He's not even one of their top 3 to 4 most notable players, but the fact that he's trusted to have the ball in his hands late and make that type of play speaks not just to like him as a player, but things are clicking and trending in the right direction, generally speaking, for North Carolina, and Hubert Davis being able to coach his way back into this game and put his player in a spot to get that done really speaks volumes.
Yeah. I mean, when you're able to get, they don't need their guards to be great. If you're Carolina, let's talk about them big picture, right? You don't need your guards to be great. You don't need, Seth Trimble to be Darren Peterson. That's not what you need. What you need is a level of toughness on the defensive end, the ability to keep other guards and the Ibuka Corys of the world in front. And you got to be able to have guys that can make plays in moments when you need plays to be made, right? You don't need them to average 25 points a game. You just need them to be good enough in big moments when Caleb Wilson is very clearly like run himself into the ground to be able to find a way to win when it matters, to win in those moments. And I think that's exactly what they did. That's exactly what you saw there. And you got to give them credit for it, man. It's hard sometimes. And I think there's certainly places where you can criticize Hubert Davis as a head coach, right, over the course of his career. But I do think it says a lot about him that he has seemingly moved away from the significant monetary investment that they have in Kyan Evans, and it just kind of said, look, you know what, Derek Dixon is going to end up being the guy. He played 33 minutes against Duke. I think it's pretty clear who is the preferred point guard at this point in Carolina's season, and stuff like that is not easy to do. And while it might not be the sexiest thing to credit a coach for, is making personnel decisions that seem fairly obvious, it's a lot more difficult to do that than I think people realize.
I think that's a great point by you. I think so many coaches in this NIL world kind of feel stuck to, well, we promised this guy this monetarily, all this investment, and ultimately, you do the best you can to set your roster up. But then once the season's going along, the goal is winning, right? And so how are you able to change things around and figure out what's working? And not every coach would be able to do that. So I think that's a really good point. On the Duke side of things here, a couple of things that really stick out to me. Obviously, the Duke blowing leads thing is a big deal. This is their second loss this year when they've lost a big lead. And I think it really only is a big storyline because Duke loses so infrequently that when they do, and it happens to be a blown lead situation, it kind of carries storylines. But it's not like they've had 5 blown leads this year. But certainly, you think back to the Houston game in the Final Four. You think back to 1 or 2 games last year. Certainly, their game against Texas Tech earlier in the season. That's certainly a trend. I don't necessarily have a ton of fear that that's going to happen every single time. It's certainly a thing. The other thing I think that was more of a factor in this game.
You know why? It's a thing, Evan. It's a thing because outside of the Clemson loss last year, which there were a lot of mitigating factors there. I think didn't Cooper Flagg have the flu, and it was on the road. And if you look at the last 2 seasons, the issue that Duke has had has been being able to protect some of those leads when they've lost. Right? They've had 6 losses in the last 2 years, and 5 of them could be qualified as giving games away, right? There was the Texas Tech game this year. They were up by 17. They were up by 13 in the first half against North Carolina. They were up by 14 with 8 minutes left against Houston. And then early on in the season against Duke and against Kansas, they had leads and then they were unable to execute in clutch situations. So I don't know if those necessarily fall into the same category, but at the very minimum, since in the last calendar year, right? Because now it's February 9th. So in the last calendar year, there have been 3 losses that Duke has had. And in all 3 of those losses, they've held a double-digit lead. So there's 2 ways to look at this, right? Duke is good enough where they're going to get up and put together, doesn't matter who they're playing. They're going to get up big. They're going to put up these big leads. They're going to lead by 8, 10, 12, 14, 16 points at some point against pretty much everybody that they play. And at some point you are going to lose games when you have a lead. It's just natural. Like in the world of sports, especially when you're dealing with a team that has a lot of 18 and 19-year-olds, you're going to have games where you get a lead and you can't close it out. It happens. It happens in the NBA. It happens in the NFL. It happens everywhere in sports, right? And the other way to look at it is that there have been too many moments where in big moments Duke has not been able to close this out. And I have a tough time criticizing this team and this program. And I've said this over and over again, the team and this program for blowing those leads when you also have to look at the fact that they were able to win in crunch time against Florida, and they had a game-winning shot against Florida, and they came back in a game against Arkansas earlier this year and ended up winning by 9. They beat Michigan State in a game where they ended up having to switch to a zone in the second half and came back and won and made 2 big plays late, just putting Cam Boozer into a ball screen with Isaiah Evans. So I think that this is going to end up being a narrative and being a thing for Duke because they've had 3 really high-profile losses that have all resulted from having a double-digit lead that they gave away. But it's also, those are literally the only 3 losses that they've had in the last calendar year. In the last 365 days, they've lost 3 games, and they've won, let's do the math here. They're 22-2 this season. Last year, they won 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16 games. So they're 38-3 in the last calendar year. And yes, 3 of those losses were games that they led by double digits. The other 38 games they led by double digits and they did not lose. So if you're going to tell me you're the analytics guy. If you're going to tell me that John Shire has, what is that, like a 92% rate of winning games that he leads by double digits, I think that that's a pretty good rate when it comes down to it.
Yeah, my prognosis is not worried.
Yes.
You know, when you have all these other games where it doesn't even come close to being questioned and they just win by double digits, that means you're doing something well. I think it's a bit unlucky and unfortunate, and you can question a few things there, but not a capital P problem for them. I do want to move on quickly.
Let's be clear too. Like there are some flaws with this Duke team. Like I think they're a little bit too reliant on Cam Boozer, but like he's a national player of the year and you don't have a point guard.
Yeah.
It's kind of is what it is.
I also think Pat Ngongba being in foul trouble last year or in this game was a huge factor. He was really, really good in the opening 4 to 5 minutes. He only plays 16 minutes in this game. That forced Duke to go small. And when you actually look at the analytics, like Duke has not played very well when both Caleb Foster and Caden Boozer are on the floor, and they had to play more time together just because of who they had available. So I don't think that helps them, and you know, certainly hopefully that's not an issue going forward for them. But yeah, I'm not super concerned. Okay, I want to get your thoughts on St. John's and UConn Friday night in the Garden. You were there for this game. This was the most anticipated game probably in the Big East all season, outside of coming the Big East tournament most likely. And it was going to be a great atmosphere. I think I've heard people talking about how the home court advantage of the Garden has grown year over year for St. John's. Was that your impression? And what were your takeaways from this performance for the Johnnies in what ended up being a very convincing late game stretch for them to kind of take this one?
Well, I mean, that building was on fire, right? Like there was a level of anticipation for St. John's fans that were there that ended up paying off. And I think a lot of it was the fact that, I mean, look, normally when UConn plays there, even when it's a St. John's home game, you're looking at like 35 to 50% of that arena being UConn fans. Now, that was the 4th time that UConn's played at the Garden this season. And when you combine that with the BYU game, like there's been lots of opportunities for some of these traveling fans that don't live in and around stores in Hartford to be able to go and see these guys play. So that might have played a role in it as well. I think the price of the tickets was probably a little bit scary for people. Friends of mine that I know that went to that game paid $350 for upper level tickets, which is a lot of money for a ticket like that. But I mean, credit St. John's for turning that home court into an absolute hornet's nest. And I think that you saw in their performance, especially on the defensive end, what happens when you have a building that has that level of home court advantage, right? The intensity with which Dylan Darling was able to kind of provide pressure on the ball against Silas Demery. Look, you can watch it on TV. I promise you, Evan, you can sit there and you can watch it on TV. I don't think you can fully appreciate how hard it is to go up against that St. John's team until I was sitting like 6 feet away from where UConn was trying to inbound the ball past Dylan Mitchell, who was going like this. And you can't appreciate how hard that is until you see it up close and in person with how athletic he is. You had St. John's fronting the guys trying to get the ball in. Like, there were probably 6 or 7 times where I'm sitting there counting in my head like 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. How is that not a 5-second call in inbounds? I think there's a ceiling to how good St. John's can be, just because I think when you are a team that relies on ball pressure and forcing other teams into making mistakes, like you get to the best teams in college basketball, you have a good point guard, you're not going to make mistakes, right? Like, that's just kind of what it is. But I think that this is absolutely a team that can get to a second weekend. And if you can get to a second weekend, you know, anything can happen. You could have a fluky run to get to Indianapolis. So I just the levels with which they've improved since the first month of the season is leaps and bounds. They're as improved as any team in college basketball, I think.
Yeah, I mean, one of the storylines going into this game was how this is not a typical St. John's team in the sense that they've been stronger offensively than defensively. And yet in this game, Pitino really, really ramped up the defensive pressure, both on those inbounds plays like you talked about, just the way that they were guarding Silas Demery. I mean, Demery had 9 turnovers in this game. It's the second most he's had in any game in his career. The most he had in his career was 10 against St. John's when he was playing for Georgia in November of 24. So there's something that Pitino has found with Demery, and this has not been an issue for him, but it certainly was in this game. I mean, this was just an interesting game from him in general. I want to get your thoughts on this because offensively at times in the second half, he had a crazy stretch in the second half where I think he had 9 points and an assist in a little over 4 minutes. He makes a few layups, hits a 3, has a nice like he was driving UConn forward, but ultimately the big picture was all of the mistakes that he was making and the way that they were pressuring him. So a very mixed bag from him. Do you think that's an area that's exploitable going forward for him, or do you think this is mostly just a St. John's is really good at this type thing?
I think it's both. Like, turnovers has been an issue for UConn since the season started. I believe they are still, and I'll check on it right now, but I think that they're still last place in offensive turnover rate, second to last now, because DePaul is apparently the team that turns the ball over the most. But they turn the ball over on 18% of their possessions offensively in Big East play, which is just not something that is going to be sustainable. And some of that is Silas Demery. Some of that is a lot of the other guys on this roster that are just a little bit sloppy. You know, the tough thing with this group is I think the talent is there, but there's a lot of the mistakes that they make. Like, it's undisciplined stuff. It's sloppy offensively. It is being lazy, moving your feet on the defensive end and committing a reach and foul instead of sliding and trying to use your chest and get in front. It is you're contesting at the rim, and instead of going vertical, you're bringing your arms down and committing a foul. Those are going to end up being the issues, right? Because UConn they are very, very good on the defensive end when it comes to just kind of keeping teams in control. And because of the pace that they play, like, there's a little bit of Virginia there where they're going to run clock. They're not going to beat themselves. They're going to make it very difficult for you to get a good shot. And you're just not going to be able to go off on these like 6-0, 8-0, 12-0 runs in that. You don't see kill shots against UConn all that often. And it's going to keep them in games, and it's going to allow them to be able to be competitive. But when you're a team that plays like that, all of a sudden those like turnovers that lead to layups at the other end. I think there were 4 pick-six turnovers that they gave up against St. John's. those end up being the absolute killers because, I mean, they always are, but because that allows you to get a quick basket when your whole thing is we're going to make it tough for you to score, right? When you have things where it's like sloppy fouling and then all of a sudden you have to go to your bench and Malachi Smith, who looked great at the start of the year but has completely lost his confidence when he has to come in for Silas Demery for long stretches, or you got to bring in Eric Ryba for Terrace Reed against the Big East Player of the Year and Zuby Ejiofor. Like those are things where all of a sudden those like fine margins get trimmed down when you're kind of built around being this team that can play close games and can win close games. That's a difficult, it becomes more problematic for a team that is built the way this UConn team is than it would be for most teams.
Yeah. What most impressive player to me in this game was Dylan Mitchell. I've loved Dylan Mitchell for years. I have thought he's very underrated as a player who's never going to be your leading scorer or primary offensive threat, but I think he does so many things well. In this game, he had 15.6 rebounds, 2 assists, just felt physically and athletically just all over the place in a way that was a huge aspect for St. John's. And I was watching him thinking, you know, a player who he reminds me of, who if I have to say, like, what's a previous player that his game typifies, I think he's kind of a similar role to Andre Jackson in what he did for UConn. Do you think that is a fair comparison? Because big picture for both of these guys, obviously slightly different games, but they're kind of the like stereotypical glue guy for your team who does all of the connective stuff offensively and defensively really well. He's not as good of player as Andre Jackson was, but in terms of that type of role, do you think that's a fair comparison, or would you disagree with that?
Not like, I thought Andre was a little bit more of like a pass first guy, but the impact that they have, I see where you're going with that, because a lot of what they do, it's not the stuff that's going to show up in the box score. It's just the fact that you got this 6'7" dude with this long wingspan that is literally the most athletic human being you've ever seen in your life, and they're making life miserable for opponents just because they're long and athletic. Yeah, I'm picking up what you're putting down there, Evan, but when it comes to, like, I think where St. John's season flipped was when the effort that you see Dylan Mitchell playing with and the effort that you see Zuby Ejiofor playing with rubbed off on Bryce Hopkins and rubbed off on Ian Jackson. And when Dylan Darling turned into a guy that you could trust to play 23, 24 minutes as a ball hawking point guard, like when you saw the effort that Zuby and Dylan played with, and then that became the example that was used for these other guys on the roster, like that's when it kind of impacted everything. And the thing about Andre Jackson, if you talk to people from that 2023 UConn team, was that he was the leader and the tone center and the guy where that kind of in that locker room was like, we're not doing any of that. Whatever that was that we were just doing, that is not happening. There's a story that goes around where he was in the locker room, and let's just say that there was a locker that did not survive a bad first half and a halftime meeting because of Andre Jackson in there. And I think that's kind of more than anything else. It's not just the athleticism. It's like there's a tone that he sets within that program that I think you see come through with the way that they're playing now.
For sure. Okay, I want to move quickly to a result in the SEC. Kentucky beats Tennessee 74-71. This was yet another example of Kentucky, number one, coming from back behind in a game that they were once again down, and somehow they keep managing to win these games. Tennessee, you feel like you've seen this a lot with them over the last several years with being in commanding positions and losing them. For me, I think what really sticks out to me about this was Otega Owe is really returning to the form and level player that a lot of people expected him to be. He has never been downright poor this year, but certainly there were body language issues, effort issues early in the season, as with most of the team. I think every single game this season, he has scored over 10 points, but in the last 5 games, he has scored 20 or more points. And when you look back to the beginning of the season, he won his first 9 games of the year without hitting 20 once. So he's really turning up the ability to lead this team by example. And I think that is also then leading to Kentucky being better on the defensive end of the court. Kentucky held Tennessee to 37% from the field this year, which was their lowest this season. So, Kentucky 8-1 in their last 9 games. They're trending in the right direction. What did you think of Kentucky in this game?
It's not just Owe. Like Brandon Garrison was a guy who was called out and benched for lack of effort, and he's been a monster here of late. I think with Owe, the biggest thing is if you watch the way the ball moves offensively for Kentucky, he's getting a lot more opportunities to attack closeouts. And the thing about Ortega is if you kind of put him in an ISO situation and say, all right, go make a move, go beat this guy off the dribble, it's not really what he does best. Right? You don't want him to be the guy that's in the ball screen coming off of it. You want him to swing, and then have somebody sprinting at him and allow him to be able to go past that guy, right? That's basically what he does best, maybe better than anybody in the SEC because he's so strong. And once he gets going to the rim, like, what are you going to do? You either got to foul him or just pray that he misses a shot at the basket. And I think that part of I like Jalen Lowe, right? I think Jalen Lowe is a very good player. I think that he's the wrong fit stylistically as a point guard. And not having him there, right? He got injured in the first, 30 seconds of the Mississippi State game, right? And if you look at what they've done since then, Kentucky's won 8 of their last 9. And I don't think that you can look at the fact that they don't have a ball-dominant point guard out there anymore and the success that they've had offensively, to me, it's very easy to connect those dots. And I think that part of the effort is that now the ball is getting shared a little bit more instead of being in Jalen Lowe's hands. And I think that helps. When you're getting more touches offensively, it's a lot easier to convince yourself that you need to work on the defensive end of the floor. And then I don't know where this would stand in your metrics, but I think that there is a level of confidence that they have now where at the start of the year, some of it was, man, we're in a close game. How are we going to blow this? This is what we do. We compete, and then we end up blowing this game. They did not execute against North Carolina down the stretch. They did not execute against Missouri down the stretch. And when you combine those two things with some of those blowout losses where guys couldn't come, they weren't able to get off the mat after they got punched against Michigan State and Gonzaga, I think that there was a level of confidence that they lacked in those games. And I think after the comeback win against LSU and then the comeback win at Tennessee, now there's a little bit of, it's not, oh man, how are we going to lose this game? It's now we're down. All right, we're going to find a way to come back and win this. We just got to keep competing, keep fighting. And I don't know if it's hard for me to just kind of say this is it's a mental shift, right? It's a vibe shift, whatever it is. But it feels like this is one of those situations where you just kind of look at it and say, okay, this team believes now, right? They're bought into themselves. And I don't know, man. It just feels like something has changed within that locker room. Because if you would have showed me after that Gonzaga game and said, this is going to be a team that's going to have 3 15-plus point comebacks in the SEC, I would have laughed in your face. If you would have told me that was going to be a team that could blow a 15-point lead at Arkansas, find themselves down by 5 with 6 minutes left and 17 technicals going against them, and still come back and win that game against Coach Cal in that environment, I would have laughed. I'm blown away by the way that Mark Pope has been able to turn that thing around.
You have to give him credit because I think he was obviously very accountable for the mistakes and the lack of whatever was missing early in the season. And he basically said, I don't remember the exact quote, but it was something along the lines of, we're not a good basketball team right now. We will be by the end of the season. Just, keep the faith. And that is what is happening. I still have concerns for them in terms of what I think their performance level can be against the best competition in the SEC, top 4 to 5 seeds in the NCAA tournament. Basically, if you rank all of their opponents they've played this season on my website, the top 5 teams that they've played, they've only won one of those games, and that was their neutral game against St. John's, and that was a much worse St. John's team than we see now. So maybe they're going to find themselves in a situation against a team of Florida's caliber and be down 15, and they can't claw their way back because that team is just too good. But certainly against these middling teams, against these middling teams, they can do it more. But you're right that there's the talent level that maybe they were hyping in the preseason. Certainly we've not seen that. They're missing some obvious players, of course.
You know what it is? It's one of those things where I kind of think about this from a fantasy football perspective, right? Where how often do you sit there and look at your team and it's like, well, I got good starters and I got a good bench, but none of my guys are top 12 at their position. And then what you try to do is you're like, I'm going to package these two wide receiver twos to try to go get a wide receiver one, right? Like, how can I get these two guys that are borderline starters to go get a star? And then you would have to go try to find a team that has like this, doesn't have the depth and is basically starting like a guy that gets 3 targets a game. You know what I mean? And find a way to be able to fill them in. But when you have 12 guys, like that's the biggest thing, is they had 12 guys that were all good players. I don't know if they necessarily had any great players, and that will only get you so far when it comes to winning a championship. So I think that this is a team that's got second weekend upside, and that's kind of capped at that. But if you, I know Kentucky fans were thinking national championship when the season started. They were also probably thinking NIT after the Gonzaga game. And if you could say, hey, look, even though you lost your starting point guard and you lost your starting 5 and you lost Cam Williams, you got a chance to get to the second weekend here and maybe win an SEC championship. I think most of them would probably say, all right, yeah, we'll take that, and then we'll see if we can find a way to be able to find more talent next year.
Yeah. Okay, we're going to touch on more of the big games from the weekend later on the show, but I want to end with a fun game here. We're going to take a big picture of where all the teams stack according to the metrics on my website, and we're going to play a quick game of buy sell. So I've roughly looked at all the teams that are kind of rated in similar tiers here, and we're going to list each one, and I want each of us to quickly pick a team that we're buying and selling, not necessarily saying like, oh, this team is the best team in this group, therefore I'm buying them, but more just like relative to their position, I think they're going to end up being even better than this going forward, or vice versa on the sell side. So in this top tier, again, this is not exactly scientific, but this is roughly how the numbers break down. There are 4 teams that are kind of above everyone else right now, and that would be Michigan, Arizona, Duke, and Houston. That's the top 4 right there. Yes. So Michigan, Arizona, and Duke are all rated pretty close to each other, and then Houston's slightly below, but still very much in that top group. So of those 4, I guess I'll start with what's the team that you feel like most confident in right now, and then which team do you maybe feel like could fall out of that tier going forward?
Most confident in Arizona. Like I think that Michigan probably has a bit of a higher ceiling. I think Michigan probably also has a bit of a lower floor, and we've seen that kind of play out with the way we gotten some results this season. So I would buy Arizona out of that group, and I'm probably selling Houston, and that's just because I think that there's a top 3 in college basketball this year. I think it's Duke, Arizona, and Michigan. And I don't think Houston's in that group. So out of that tier, I would have to sell Houston.
That's interesting, because for me, I feel like I would put Michigan and Arizona in kind of their tier A, and I would slide Duke down to B with Houston. So I almost feel like I'm selling a little bit on Duke in that group and maybe buying Houston, I guess. I don't really feel comfortable saying I'm buying Michigan or Arizona because they're both really good, but
you're not getting a good price if you're buying them right now.
Yes, that's correct. Okay, so next year, this is where it gets interesting. I've got 5 teams here: Florida, Illinois, UConn, Iowa State, and Purdue. Florida, Illinois, UConn, Iowa State, Purdue. What are your thoughts there, buy, sell?
I know who I'm selling. I think it's pretty clear. I'm out on Purdue in that tier. Now, I'm not out on Purdue overall, but I'm out on Purdue in that tier. And I would probably, honestly, I'd probably buy UConn out of that group. And the reason I say that is because I think Florida and Illinois have both kind of made their runs here, right? Like at this point, we're kind of at like the peak of what public perception can be for both Illinois and Florida. And I don't know how much higher they can go in that group. Whereas I think UConn, coming off of the loss and the fact that they're offensively, they've been great for 2 games and they struggled and they're good and they struggle again. The solo ball hasn't hit his peak yet. I still think that there's more room for UConn to grow than anybody else in that group.
For me, I'm buying Illinois out of this group. I think once they get Kylan Boswell back, I think they have the potential to be the best team or tie for Big Ten championship. So I'm very high on Illinois. I get the Purdue pessimism, and they are certainly on a downward spiral right now, and they are not at the level that they want to be entering the tournament. If the tournament was right now, I'd be out on Purdue. But I just have so much confidence in if you, on paper, if you're looking at any group of players who you're going to say, this is the group that can, with the veteran leadership and experience of literally many of these players, some of these players have literally been to a national title before, and you have a veteran coach like Matt Painter, I think we're talking about Purdue in a very different light in a month from now. So yes, maybe they're the worst team in that group, but I'm not necessarily selling them.
I'll tell you what, man, as somebody that planned a trip around getting to the Michigan Purdue game on February 17th, I hope that you're right. Because
I will also be at that. I will also be at that game, and I hope that I'm right as well. This is going to be a bit of a hot one for me, but I'm selling. All these teams are great. I'm selling Iowa State, and the reason why is they're on a 5-game winning streak, but all of those games have been against teams outside the top 40. No team in the top 10 has had their rating drop more over the last month on my site than Iowa State. Like I think they're a good team, but I do not think that they have been showing the level that we saw from them in, say, November, December. They have a really brutal stretch coming soon. They're obviously going to prove what they're about. Kansas, Houston, BYU, Texas Tech, and Arizona shortly thereafter. So tough call, but I'm just pointing some things out here.
No faith in TJ Otzelberger. Unbelievable.
Okay, next tier here, I'm gonna put 10 teams in here, so this is a little bit larger, and we'll just do this one.
Can I just say real quick that you are not selling the team that went into that was the home that played at home as the number 1 team in the country and got beat by 23, but you are selling the team that went into the then number 1 team in the country's gym and beat them by 23 points.
That is correct.
That is correct. Okay, I'm just making sure.
Yep. That is what we're doing here. Okay.
And if you end up being right, then I will be the biggest promoter of the of evanmiya.com from now on.
Yeah, we'll be circulating this clip everywhere. Although I'm just going to say I'm not hate watching Iowa State. I think they're a great team. That's just where I'm going with this. Okay, next tier: Michigan State, Gonzaga, Kansas, Nebraska, St. John's, Vanderbilt, Virginia, Texas Tech, Alabama, Tennessee. We've got the teams ranked 10th through 19 right there. Pretty wide tier, but of those names, what team sticks out to you as a team you're buying into? Texas Tech, Alabama, Tennessee at the bottom there.
I will sell. Well, I'm going to buy Kansas.
I'm also buying Kansas.
Yeah, I've been on this bandwagon all season long. If you're going to give me Bill Self, a top 10 defense, Darren Peterson, and Melvin Council, I think that is a top 5 to 8 title contender. I don't want to say top 5 to 8 team, but I think they're a top 5 to 8 title contender in college basketball. So I will buy Kansas. I'll probably sell, pretty much anybody, all the SEC teams in that group. I don't think that there's an actual title contender in the SEC this year outside of Florida. Alabama, I don't trust them defensively. I don't think that there's enough around Jacoby Gillespie or Nate Ament for Tennessee. And then with Vanderbilt, I love the story and I want it to work. I just don't think they have enough size, right? Like they feel like one of those really fun mid-major teams that everybody adores, and then they get to the tournament, and then all of a sudden their 6-foot point guard and 6'2" off guards got to deal with 6'3" and 6'5", and their 6'8" bigs got to deal with 6'11" and 7 foot, and it's like, oh, okay, well that's now we know why those guys were at the level that they were at. So I love this Vanderbilt story. I just don't think they have the size to be able to deal with the monsters that you're going to find when you get to the Elite Eight and the Final Four.
Yeah, I think that's fair. The team that I'm selling from this category is Texas Tech, and it is purely for their depth issues. They're obviously their stars, Christian Anderson, JT Toppin, incredible, maybe the best duo in college basketball, but I just do not think this team has the pieces, the guns to consistently play in March Madness when everyone is giving 100% to make it that far compared to maybe what they're hoping for, just because I think there was a massive, massive talent and reliability drop off once you get outside of their top 3 to 4 guys. And, I think they've overcome that well to this point in the season. I don't necessarily know if that's going to continue for them.
Yeah, fair.
Okay. I get it. I feel like we should probably leave it there. I know we could keep chatting for forever, but I'm gonna let you go. Thank you so much, Rob, for joining me today. You and Field 68 have been so important to college basketball, and so I just want to thank you for everything you're doing, and I really appreciate you coming on the show today.
I appreciate you, man. Thanks for having me on.
Thank you to Rob Dauster for joining me today. You can find all of Rob's stuff on the Field of 68, on YouTube, on X, and all of those platforms. The Field of 68 After Dark show, if you're unfamiliar, is on almost every single night during the college basketball season, recapping all the day's action, so you can find him there. I also know he records several other regular Field of 68 podcasts, like the Shoot or Shoot podcast, so be sure to check out Dauster in all of those places for Field of 68 stuff. Well, we've got more games to get to, along with some bubble and resume talk, and with me to do that is Eamonn Brennan, who runs The Buzzer, a great college basketball newsletter, also does some stuff with Basket Under Review. Eamonn, we have a huge Big Ten game to talk about. Michigan State beats Illinois 85-82 in the Breslin Center. Big picture in this game, Jeremy Fears, whatever way you slice it, is kind of the storyline here. He was awesome in this game. 26 points, 16 assists. He continues to be probably the best player in the Big Ten. Obviously, all of the tripping, dirty play stuff is still a conversation, and there's some speculation about what happened in this game. I don't want to spend a ton of time on that, but that's still going on. Either way you slice it, he's the big picture here. But Jackson Kohler also was great in this game. 16 rebounds, some big threes in the second half. And I think on the Illinois side of things, it was Keaton Wagler struggling really for the first time in a while, and struggling in a really big way. He finished this game with 16 points, but just 2 of 16 from the field. He did make almost all of his free throws, which has been a consistently great thing for him, which has been awesome. And he played most of this game. I do think Illinois is really missing Kylan Boswell in a spot like this. Just overall, Illinois, who is typically a great three-point shooting team, just 28% from the field from three-point land on 36 attempts. So a lot of stuff here. What were your overall takeaways from this big clash between Michigan State and Illinois?
Yeah, sure. No, I mean, you touched on a lot of them. I think on the Illinois side, for sure, it was Wagler looking a bit overwhelmed. And I don't want to overstate that case because he still took his shots. It's not like he shied away from it. Like, things weren't falling. He kept going. Obviously, he was 0 of 8 from 2, 2 of 8 from 3. One of those threes was late when it was kind of, I think they were down, 6 or 5 or something, needed to cut it quickly. And that was the first time he kind of looked like in the rhythm of his typical shot all night, which is probably telling. There was a moment late in the game. I was chatting along with, my Substack live chat folks, and it was right after he had a turnover on a drive to the right side of the lane, where the ball just kind of squirmed away from him, and he looked a little bit weak relative to whoever was guarding him at that point, and maybe Cam Ward. I'm not sure. It was just sort of like, I immediately was like, Mirkovic needs to have the ball now. And the very next possession, and Brad Underwood and I, simpatico, right on the same wavelength, he put the ball in Mirkovic's hands instead, and they immediately got a layup, with one of those little crazy left-handed floater finishes that Mirkovic is so capable of pulling off. And yeah, it had that feel of like, if it's not Keaton's game by now, it's not going to be his game. There's about a minute or two left here, and now's the time where, yeah, obviously if you had Boswell, he'd have the ball in his hands, but you've basically got the choice of those two guys to initiate your offense, and one of them looks a little bit more settled than the other. And so, yeah, that was a big takeaway. It's really the worst we've seen him play, and the most we've seen him look like a freshman, and maybe not a particularly heralded freshman, since UConn and Alabama early in the year. Those are really his two other notably bad games, and he still got it done at the free throw line and made some big free throws to kind of keep them in the game, and did some other decent stuff. But definitely the first time all year, or at least since the turn of the year, where he's looked like not a top 5, top 7 phenomenal all of a sudden lottery pick. On the Michigan State side, you alluded to it, and I don't want to get into it because it's kind of tedious, but it is a little annoying to me, just as a neutral, the Rob Lowe with the NFL hat on, appreciator of college basketball, that Fears is by far getting more attention for what he's doing in various outlier moments of the game. And he's done it enough now where you can say it's not an outlier, and skirting the line in this game between what's intentional and what's not. I think you could probably poll people, and a fair number of them would say that it was, given his reputation, probably intentional what happened in the Illinois game specifically. But the other incidents are just like kind of clear cut. And it's a shame because people are talking about that with him, and he's gotten this kind of negative reputation throughout the sport a little bit, or at least among fans of other teams, when what he's actually producing as a player is like mind-bogglingly good, especially coming in last year. from last year when he was part of the reason why Michigan State's offense struggled so much last year. And you coming into this year and looking at their roster and being like, look, these guys are going to guard, they're going to rebound, they'll be tough. They're a top half Big Ten team, no question. But where on earth are they going to get offense from? And it turns out they have the best passer in college basketball, who's also a really good defender, who runs their show and makes everything happen. And he's just been, every time I look at his stats, I'm like, this is remarkable and crazy. And it's a kind of a shame that we're not all having the like, oh my God, how good is this guy? How did he get this good this quickly in his junior, theoretically junior season? And instead we're having a kind of a different conversation nationally about him.
I agree. It is a shame. And I think some of that is obviously self-inflicted, right? He wouldn't be, this conversation would be happening if he wasn't doing the things that he had done in some of these recent games. But I do think it is overshadowing just how excellent he has been. When I was writing down his stats from this game, I watched the whole game, and then I write it down, 26 points, 16 assists, and then I go back and look at him like, did I write that down right? Like 16 assists and 26 points? That's crazy. He's averaging 15 points and 9 assists on the year, but he's had 25 plus points in 3 of his last 4 games. I would make the argument statistically from a number of perspectives that he is the best playmaker in the country, better than Braden Smith. He's got the best assist grade on my website, far better than anyone else. And the other thing, too, is if you look at the best point guards in the country, in terms of the guys who have the best overall assist rates, he also has the lowest turnover grade of any of those players. So not only is he like dishing the ball well, but he's also not coughing it up very much for a guy who's being asked to literally do everything for this team. So I think that's impressive. And I think nationally, you can make an argument that at least statistically, outside of Cameron Boozer, there's not been a better player this year in all of college basketball. On my website, if you sort players by box BPR, which is basically my own college-trained version of box plus minus, he is second in the country behind Cameron Boozer. So if you look at what he's doing from a statistical standpoint, it is almost unparalleled in college basketball this year. So I wish that he would be getting more of this conversation because he's been that good. And I think even just the storyline of surpassing Braden Smith as maybe the front runner for Big Ten Player of the Year. I've heard some people talking about it that way. I can certainly see an argument for it. Like, that's pretty impressive that he's been able to do this. So yeah, he's been good.
Yeah. And I mean, you think about it just from the classic, like, baseball MVP conversation or whatever, like you subtract one guy from one team and one guy from another team. Like you subtract Yaxel from Michigan. That's a big blow. He's a really, really good player and really important to what they do. That's still a really good Michigan team. If you take Jeremy Fears out of Michigan State's lineup, how are they going to score the ball? Cohen Carr is going to stand with 15 feet of space on the wing every game, and literally teams are just going to play 5-on-4. And, how is Jackson Kohler going to get a touch where he can step outside and make a three? Like, it's just, the value add is I think him and Boozer pretty obviously. And even Duke, you could make the argument like that's still a really good Duke team, and they'd plug, another 5-star guy into the lineup and still be one of the best 5 teams in the country. I think Michigan State without Fears is like the whole thing just grinds to a complete halt.
Got a metric for this literally on my website
of
called
course
indispensability score. And it's basically measuring exactly that. The difference between how good a team would be with that player versus without that player. Number 1, Cameron Boozer. Number 2, Jeremy Fears. So there you go. And yeah, players like Yaxel,
for sure.
Players like Yaxel who are rated more highly overall in terms of player metrics and stuff, he's down further because, like you said, Michigan still has a lot of really other great players, and they're not playing in such a way that they're relying on Yaxel to be the best player every single night in, night out. But the way that Michigan State is structured, everything runs through Jeremy Fears, and he is doing everything for this team. I think for both of these teams, like Michigan State and Illinois, both of them have identical 20-4 records. So in that sense, they're even. But when you're looking at from where they're sitting resume perspective-wise, one of the things that I do on my resume quality metric on my website, which is similar to wins of a bubble, I actually break it into win quality and loss quality. And the difference between these two teams is they're almost similar in terms of the quality of losses that they've taken. They're all pretty fine. But Illinois just has better wins overall. They've won at Purdue, at Nebraska, at Iowa, at Ohio State. All of those carry the most weight there. winning all of those games on the road is substantial, and Michigan State's only win of that caliber is this game that they won at home against Illinois. And I think if you're just looking big picture for Illinois, when you're talking about 3 weekends in a row, pretty much, right, where you're playing at Purdue, at Nebraska, at Michigan State, going 2-1 in that stretch and having one down game for Keaton Wagler against the best defense of the bunch, potentially the best defense in the country, like that's going to happen. And Illinois has still put themselves in a really strong position through this brutal stretch that they've played, to be in good shape going forward. So I'm not really worried about Illinois. How do you feel about them going forward?
Yeah, no, completely. I mean, look, like this is absolutely a game Illinois could have won it in regulation, could have won it, with a few bounces here or there in the last couple minutes in overtime. I think and again, Wagler played poorly, and Boswell is out. And I think if you reasonably assume moving forward, Wagler will typically not play this poorly, because again, it's as bad as he's been since December, really, or November even. And you factor Boswell back in with his perimeter defense and his ability to handle your Jeremy Fearses of the world, bringing the ball up the floor, and just the kind of vibe of the game and all the big situations he's already been in. That Wagler, Purdue and Nebraska aside, and as incredible as those performances were, like, there's going to be this kind of stuff with even the most highly touted freshmen. And we see it with, AJ DeBonsa, who I'm sure we'll come on to. Like, you have these moments, almost every freshman has them, no matter how talented they are. And I think it's one of those things where you're like, a little bit like when you're watching a game at halftime, you're like looking at the box, we're like, oh, this guy's 0 for 4, this guy's 0 for 6, they're only down 3. This is bullish for them going. It's a little bit like Illinois coming off loss. They still could have won this game. And I have them in, it took me a little while to get there, I think, but I have them now very much in the Michigan, Arizona, Duke, Houston, Iowa State national title contender conversation, because they guard so much better this year. They're as good as anyone, if not better, offensively, and they have a dimension of height and diversity of ball handling talent that a lot of teams in the country don't have.
Yeah, I'm there with you. I want to move to the Big 12 and talk about Houston going on the road and beating BYU 77-66. I don't really want to spend a ton of time on Houston, other than they're just a really, really good team, and I think people are seeing that. BYU, I think, is the bigger storyline here, because BYU now is on a major losing streak where they've lost their last 4, albeit 3 of those teams were Houston, Kansas, and Arizona, and then they had a road loss to Oklahoma State. But BYU had aspirations in the preseason of being a top 10 team, maybe a Big 12 title contender. And in this game, like, DeBonsa played well. He scored 28 points. Robert Wright had some good moments. Richie Saunders, who has been excellent in previous games, just had 7. And I think a trend that we've seen recently is that you haven't found many nights against these good teams where all 3 of their stars have all played excellently. And then they don't really have the bench pieces or the depth to like really supplement that as anywhere near as well as other teams. Like, do you think that BYU needs all of their star players to be good to win games like this, because they're struggling to find ways to win, or at least stay competitive in games early when things aren't really clicking for them?
Yeah, I think so. I mean, I think you look at their minutes distribution on KenPom, and it's like those guys all play 80 minutes percentage wise or above of available minutes, and they don't have another. Davis plays 60%, Keita 50%, and they kind of fudge things in the front court. But those guys play a ton of minutes. I think you're right. They have to play well together. I mean, I think in this game, my sort of more specific concern with BYU at various points throughout the season, and really I think in the Texas Tech loss, was the extent to which the ball kind of got stuck in AJ's hands a little too often, and it was a little too much. Okay, everybody clear out. I'm ISO'd 15 foot. I'm either going to take a jump shot or I'm going to back this guy down and I'm going to go score. And that's not really what BYU did at all last year. And that's not what BYU at its best this year does. Like, the ball pops, they move, they get out and run. And I think in this game, DeBonsa, first of all, that wouldn't necessarily be the worst strategy for this specific game, because Houston just destroys everything everybody wants to do offensively. They're so aggressive. They hedge everything so hard. They blow up screens. They do all sorts of crazy stuff defensively. And so settling the game down a little bit and being like, okay, put it in the number 2 overall draft pick's hands, because he's even against this ferocious Houston defense, athletic enough, talented enough to just go score on them one-on-one. There wasn't even a ton of that, though. There was a lot of in the flow. I thought a lot of his offense came facing the rim, starting higher up in the floor, getting downhill, getting at people. It was generally pretty positive for him. But if that doesn't, to me, that should then sort of filter out more to Saunders and Wright, who I think has been pretty steady most nights. I mean, I think it sometimes feels like it's either DeBonsa or Saunders who's going to have a big night, and DeBonsa's kind of has a higher floor. Like he'll give you 15 when he's having just a so-so night. So I think that was the difficult part. And again, like with Houston, you can't afford to make mistakes against them. And the other thing with BYU that I've noticed all season, this was a big theme coming into the year, so maybe it's a little confirmation bias because I was looking for it. But last year they were a genuinely very poor perimeter defensive team. Mm-hmm. And for whatever the variance of 3-point opponent shooting is, you can see in the film, like, okay, these guys are just open though. You know what I mean? Like whether the shot goes in or not, you're giving up a lot of good looks. And it came through in the numbers last year with the percentages they allowed and the amount of threes they allowed opponents to shoot. And it hasn't been nearly as bad this year, but you still see it in spots. You saw it in the Texas Tech game numerous times with Christian Anderson, just getting wide open looks off simple screen action. And, in this game, there's like a minute left. DeBonsa comes down, hits a 3, cuts it to 5. And BYU's kind of like, okay, here we go. The crowd gets up a little bit. Immediate next possession, DeBonsa gets completely just buried under a JoJo Tugler, kind of pinned down screen action. And Sharp is wide open. Like no one's within 15 feet of him at the top of the key. That shot's going down 60% of the time, I'd say. That open for Emmanuel Sharp. And it's just like, you can't have those mistakes against teams like Houston. If you want to compete with the Arizonas, the Houstons, the Kansases of the world, even the Texas Techs, those fine details really matter. And BYU, despite being better at them this year and more talented, I think, than they were last year, still has those moments where they just let stuff slip.
I mean, you mentioned that they were a lot more balanced last year in terms of players they relied upon, the depth of their roster. I remember keeping an eye on that during the season, being like, I love this BYU team last year going into the tournament just because of how they can go 8 or 9 deep and all the guys are very high level. So I was actually comparing this now and looking at, if you look at the 6th best player on BYU's roster last year compared to this year in terms of Bayesian performance rating on my site, where they rank compared to all other players. Last year, the 6th best rated BYU player was Dallin Hall, and he was inside the top 250 nationally. This year, that 6th best player on BYU is Kennard Davis. He's outside the top 1,000. We're talking about a massive, massive drop in terms of reliability as you go down the roster. And yeah, that puts a lot of pressure on Saunders and DeBonsa and Wright to be great. And they're given a lot of leash in this offense to kind of do whatever they want and chuck shots up and stuff. And but outside of that, there's not really necessarily as much of a good, reliable system where you have all these players who are able to contribute in their own unique ways. And that was a strength of this BYU team last year, and I certainly don't think they have that this year. Okay, I want to move on to talking about Florida, and this was kind of a shocking result in some ways because they played Texas A&M on Texas A&M's home floor. A&M coming into the game had an incredible start to SEC play. I think just 1 loss in conference play, and or maybe 2 going into this game. But I think we expected Florida to win because A&M has notably played a very weak schedule up until this point in the SEC. But this game was completely it was all Florida early, especially defensively. I think Texas A&M had 4 points, 10 minutes in the game or something like that. And when you look at the final score of this game, it does not reflect how dominant Florida was. Florida won this game by 19. But if you actually go on my site and look at the non-garbage time scoring margin of this game, basically the score up until the point when it was decided, and this is not changing, that final score was Florida 58, A&M 30. So they more or less doubled A&M in points scored when it really mattered. Florida has won 8 of 9 games. They're definitely established themselves as the top team in the SEC. And I think even resume-wise, they're a much better team than what their resume shows up to this point. And then on the flip side, A&M, yes, this is a bit of a come back down to earth moment for them, but probably to be expected at some point because they've played so well above what we might expect going forward. So, what stuck out to you from this result in the SEC?
Yeah, I mean, Florida has been a really fascinating team to track all year, and it's partly because they were the obviously reigning national champion, partly because they were, the first night of the season, they in Arizona played a great game to tip things off, and partly because they're one of the more sort of interesting roster rotations in the sport in their willingness to lean into, whether by necessity or by choice, just super big lineups. And this is primarily seen through the fact, again, somewhat by necessity given the makeup of their backcourt, but moving Thomas Hawk to the 3 is an experiment. And it was an experiment coming into the year. This guy was a stretch 4 last year, and he looks like a college stretch 4, and he's a very dynamic college stretch 4. But this year's team has him at the 3, playing outside in 90% of the time, 95% of the time. It's kind of more of a slasher and running at the rim with 2 bigs. And that has led to a dramatic cratering of their perimeter shooting, right? They're one of I think they probably are the worst high major 3-point shooting team in the country. They're 358th in 3-point field goal percentage. But and they've had some turnover woes, particularly early in the year. But I think I've just made peace with them as like, yeah, this team can't shoot from the perimeter, but if they do what they do and they don't turn the ball over, which they haven't much since we got really past the start of the year, they're going to beat almost anybody, because their baseline for performance on both ends of the floor, particularly for rebounding, they're the best rebounding team in the country by a mile. Top 3 in percentage on both ends of the floor. And they're really good, interior defense. They get a lot of, offensive rebounds and putbacks. They just generate points in a way that is sort of sustainable and that doesn't require 3-point shooting. And then they get the odd, 35, 36% night from 3. And it's like, just kiss your butt goodbye. Like, you have no chance of beating this team. And I've kind of made peace with it. Like, early in the year, it's like, oh, Boogie Fland and Xavier Lee, can these guys get up to speed? Like, they're not going to be as good as last year's backcourt, obviously, but can they be plus whatever? And Xavier Lee might not get there at all. And he might not get there this year. He maybe will next year. Who knows what's going to happen with him? He's just kind of where he is. I think it's interesting that you have 2 Florida lineups among your top 6 in the country, and neither of them have Lee in it. It's Condon, Fland, Hanglotten, Hawk, and Klavjar, and Chinyalu, Condon, Fland, Hawk, and Klavjar. And so that kind of tells you the story of where like Xavier Lee is at. And I think Fland has sort of emerged as like the more reliable of those 2 players. And then Klavjar comes in and kind of gives them a little bit more perimeter spacing and shooting. But yeah, if Florida doesn't turn the ball over, they're probably going to beat you, and they're probably going to beat you by like 10 or 15 points. And if you can force them into turnovers, you got a chance. But once they get the ball into the half court and get a shot up, and their shot volume is high, up where it needs to be, they are tough to deal with.
Yeah, folks, if you're looking for a team when we get to Selection Sunday to say, hey, this team is underseeded and better than their seed line, I've talked about Kansas as potentially being one of those teams. Florida is going to be another one. No matter what seed that they're going to get, they've been a much better team in probably the last 2 months of the season than what they showed earlier in the year. And they played some tough opponents and lost some close games, but they're going to be a very interesting pick to potentially go far in the tournament. I want to turn our attention to some resumes, and I want to start with the conversation that we want to have, and that is talking about Miami, Ohio, okay? They're still undefeated, and I know that you just did kind of a deep dive analysis on their resume and what this could potentially look like for this team, depending on if they end up going undefeated through the regular season or if they have a loss or 2. Can you just kind of give the people a picture of what do you think their tournament outlook looks like, and how are they sort of changing or shaping the conversation around some of the resume metrics and things like that related to some of these more true mid-majors and profiles like this?
Yeah, so I feel like, for context, there's almost always a mid-major team that is sort of the darling mid-major team. And the typical way it works is that this mid-major team is like top 25, top 35 in KenPom, clearly a very good team, fun to watch, and people, they sort of gain momentum. And then you get deep into their conference season and you're sitting there kind of, if you're, rooting for them to make the tournament, as people, I feel like the groundswell often does, you're sitting there like nail biting because any loss in the Valley or the Horizon League or whatever the case may be could kill their chances. Miami's a bit like that, except like they kind of flip the conversation on its head. They, once again, and these teams kind of fit Miami's profile traditionally in that, look, they don't get many quad one opportunities. Maybe they get one or two, maybe they split them. They have one win that they can lean back on, and they're going up against these high major teams that play like 12 or 15, quad one games and maybe have 5 or 6 wins. And it's like, well, the pundits on the broadcast will be like, well, they beat so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so and so-and-so. And, obviously the opportunity space is very unequal there. What makes Miami different and interesting is that their actual, predictive metrics suggest that they're like the 90th-ish best team in the country.
They're not even the best team in their own conference. Akron is rated higher on my site and on KenPom. So if they're on a neutral, like Akron
by a
might
margin
be favored.
Too, by like 30 or 40 spots. Yeah. So that makes them like a weird inversion of the usual conversation. That's kind of fascinating to me. And what's especially interesting is we now live in a wins above bubble world where the NCAA has, I think in its selection in the last couple of seasons, pretty implicitly prioritized WAB. You step back from the bracket and you're like, okay, what are the patterns here? And you see it like pretty clearly. And, you have Dave Warlock, the great NCAA coordinator of media for the basketball tournament. I highlighted this in my piece. I think it was last week, sort of kind of just coming out and saying it in response to, I think it was Kerry Miller from the Bleacher Report had done an analysis of various resumes, kind of coming out and saying it like the broadcast should probably be talking about wins above bubble a lot more often, like, because no one ever mentions it. It's all quads. It's all, net and strength of schedule. But this is the thing that like people need to be more aware that we're really considering and taking into consideration, or the committee is, he's in the room. He's not on the committee, obviously, but just so people, trying to raise awareness of like, don't be surprised. And what's interesting about that with Miami is they have the 34th ranked wins above bubble metric. And so, you look at them and you see all these quad 4 wins, and you see the, number 360 ranked or 350th ranked strength of schedule overall. Like they've played nobody. And I don't think, with the exception of Akron, they beat Akron at home and they won at Wright State, who's the 130th in net or whatever. Those are their 2 quad 2 wins. Everything else is quad 3, quad 4. And so they will not be able to stack up to most other bubble teams in terms of like eye-popping marquee quad 1 wins. But the actual metric the NCAA seems pretty consistent on paying really close attention to. They stack up pretty well. And that's, I think, going to kind of break people's brains a little bit when we get into this, because I think a lot of the people who are arguing on behalf of Miami are like the vibes guys who are just like, they're undefeated. Who cares what their KenPom rank is? Like, don't be a nerd about it. But actually the best argument is the newest kind of nerdiest stat that the NCAA is using. So it's a weird sort of discourse around Miami. And, obviously they have to keep winning. I think, a couple of losses will probably doom them. But if they get to the conference tournament undefeated, and we're looking at a situation where they lose one game in the title game to Akron, but they're ranked 95th in KenPom, it's going to be a very interesting selection Sunday for this whole discussion.
Reason why they are rated so high in wins above bubble, I think I have them rated around the same in resume quality, which is calculated very similarly, is basically what is telling you is not look at all these great teams they've beat. What it is saying is it would be very tough for a team that's of at-large quality to win every single game on their schedule in the same way that Miami, Ohio does. What it's not saying is that like, oh, any of these games individually was really tough and we should give them more credit for that. But the statistical likelihood of, say a Texas or a California or Oklahoma State or something to play the exact same schedule that Miami, Ohio has played, including all of the road games in their conference play, which road games are a lot tougher than when you have a bye game at home. The probability that they would win all those games is not very likely, and that is why that they're on the right side of the bubble when it comes to wins above bubble. And when you look at their win quality and loss quality on my site, which basically separates like how good are your wins, how good are your losses. Obviously, they're undefeated, so their loss quality is number one, tied with Arizona. Their win quality is 97th best in the country. So if you were just looking at their stack of wins, Like it's barely inside the top 100, but it's the fact that they haven't lost a single game. That is really what carries a ton of weight. And I think there is a lot of, I would say more so in media circles than probably in the actual selection committee room, because I know they're a lot more smart and strategic about this. But in general conversation, things are thrown out, regularly speaking. It's quad 1 record, it's number of quad 3, quad 4 losses, and it's often simplified down to that very small formula. And when you look at a team like Miami, Ohio like that, they're not going to have any quad 1 games to speak of, and all of their wins look like they're puny. But the reality is there's a lot more nuance to it than just that. And I think that the general conversation around quad 1 games and the importance of that sort of thing, especially for a mid-major who doesn't have the opportunities to get as many good games, especially in this day and age when high majors don't want to do that at all. They have played the schedule they have, and they have won every single game. If this team was 19-2, we would not be talking about them at all. But they are 21-0 in D1 games. I think 24-0 all overall, and that is what it's impressive. Yeah.
And I mean, just to jump in real quick, like the elegance of the situation and wins above bubble in some ways as a metric is that everything you just said is totally like intuitive to people who just be like, well, they've won every game, so what's the problem? You know what I mean? It's not the classic, like, well, it's not easy to beat every team on your schedule, no matter who they are. Right. I mean, and you can point to an example just recently, like Gonzaga lost to Portland, and Gonzaga's I will go on the record, I'm not afraid to say it, a better team than Miami of Ohio. Right. Like it happens, and teams lose games all the time. And so there should be some credit given for not doing that. And I think, look, if the field was selected today, I think Miami would get in. I just don't think you ever leave an undefeated team out, regardless of what their predictive metrics tell you. It's just it's not done. But that's not a conversation that's relevant, because they'll either get the automatic bid or they won't be undefeated. And so it's interesting to kind of thought experiment it out now. But yeah, I mean, if you're a screw the alphabet soup, I don't care about metrics type of person, and you want to select the field based on, your ball knowledge alone, like Miami works for you too. It's an elegant situation on all fronts, because the metric, again, that the NCAA is very now openly saying, hey, this matters. Talk about it more on TV. Get people ready for Selection Sunday, please. Don't just throw up, quad 1, quad 2 in your graphics during the middle of the broadcast type stuff. It's going to be an important part of the conversation moving forward.
Yeah. Okay. I want to end by asking you about a few other mid-major conferences and their cases to get teams in the tournament, specifically the Mountain West. And I also want to talk about Santa Clara. So the Mountain West this year, right now, Utah State, I think, is solidly in the field, but San Diego State and New Mexico both have a good amount of work to do. I think you could have made a case New Mexico is in the field coming into this weekend, but they lost at home to Boise State. That certainly hurts. And then Santa Clara in the WCC has been a really, really good team this year. They're 20-5. I have them as a top 40 team in terms of the predictive metrics. They're right on the cut line right now when you look at a lot of bracketology. They obviously have the opportunities coming up to get some big wins. They host Gonzaga this weekend, and then they're playing on the road against St. Mary's. Based on your kind of expert look on these teams and their resumes, where do you think the Mountain West and the WCC sort of stack up right now? And maybe what do you think is going to happen going forward once we get to Selection Sunday?
Yeah, I mean, look, I think projecting forward is tricky, but you do kind of try to look at where are the opportunities for these teams, because again, I think for as much as the committee is moving away a little bit on the margins from what are your wins, like how many like ostensibly eye-catching wins do you have on your resume, that can be the difference when you hear conversations from like committee chairs immediately after, and they're asked, hey, this team got in and this team was the last team left out. What happened? And they'll often say, well, they did just beat, St. Mary's on the road or whatever. I think those, like for Santa Clara, this is an oversimplification, and it always is, but it's just sort of like they need, I think, badly to beat Gonzaga at home. That is like a bright red flashing light, like huge opportunity, a game they can absolutely win because they've been a very, very good team all year. Obviously, there's more nuance. Don't lose to Seattle at home a few days earlier. Don't don't fall down at Oregon State on the last night of the regular season, et cetera, et cetera. But really, it's the Gonzaga and the St. Mary's game. And I think that St. Mary's one is on the road, but St. Mary's is a more beatable team than Gonzaga. If you put those at about equal probability of happening, and get one of two, and then we'll have the conversation. I think for the Mountain West, it's just like, I look at San Diego State, I look at New Mexico, and I'm just like, talk to me in early March, because I like San Diego State. I think they've improved a lot over the course of the season, certainly since the loss to Troy. I think if you're going to have a really bad home loss, it's probably good to do it in double OT. It's also probably good to do it in November, just in terms of what, some committee members are going to think. Like, there's no explicit last 12 games thing. That hasn't been the case for like 15 years, but I do think there's an occasional, okay, we like this team and we like this team almost equally. What is a deciding factor between putting them in? It's like, well, this team has been playing better basketball lately. Maybe that's a thing you can point to. So it's best to have that bad loss, further back in the season. But, look, I think both of these teams are the epitome of bubbly. They have good stuff on their resume. They do not have a ton of like amazing stuff. The metrics are all kind of like meh, decent, not as mediocre as your Cals and Stanfords of the world, which I think they'd probably both be in over both of those teams right now. But if you have one of those teams in the field like New Mexico, they're probably an 11 seed. If you have San Diego State in the field, ditto, and you can flip them if you want to, and it's going to be very fine margins coming down the stretch here.
Yeah. Well, I think we'll leave it there. Thank you, Eamonn, so much. Your analysis is always excellent. You are the bubble and resume king, among other things. It is bubble season, so it is that time of year. So it was great to get your insight today. I really appreciate you joining me on the show today.
Happy to do it. I'm going to go tell my kids I'm the bubble and resume king, and they're going to not care at all. They're going to ask when we can watch Spider-Man again, but yeah, it'll be fun for me anyway.
We'll make you a trophy for it.
Exactly. I need that.
Thank you so much to Eamonn Brennan for joining me today. For those of you who maybe have been following Eamonn for a long time, he has been at a lot of major publications over the last decade plus, and now he is writing his own newsletter it's called The Buzzer at EamonnBrennan.com, which is a really, really great source for all of his insights. Additionally, he's also now doing the Weekend Under Review podcast, a weekly show for Basket Under Review. And I think Tate Frazier is his co-host for that show, and they've been doing an incredible job with that. So be sure to go check out all of Eamonn's stuff over on his website and at Basket Under Review. All right, we are going to wrap with Analytics Corner this week. This is the part of the show where I go into some more analytically driven insights that are often from eventful.com. And this week, I just wanted to focus on one thing, and that is talking about teams most impacted by injuries this year. I put out a graph on social media, if you follow me on Twitter or Instagram, midweek last week, looking at the teams who have been most impacted by production missed due to injuries. Basically, the way I set this graph up is using metrics at eventful.com, specifically Bayesian performance rating, which measures how valuable every single player is when they're on the court. You can basically quantify how much has a team lost in terms of their overall production based on players who have been unavailable for parts of the season or for most of the season with season-long injuries. This graph does not include players who have been out for the entire season, just because it's a little bit harder to exactly quantify what their production and minutes and that sort of stuff would be. So this just looks at players who have played during the season and who have missed injuries either partially up to this point or season ending, that sort of thing. So the main takeaways, the first thing that jumps off the page when you look at the teams that have been most impacted by injuries this year is USC. USC has their quantity level for BPR missed per game is 8. That doesn't really mean a whole lot, but the next closest team is 6, and most teams are under 5. So USC has had so much more injury misfortune than any other team in the country. And you look at this list, Rodney Rice, who is supposed to be a key piece for them this year, is out for the season. He has missed 16 games as of last week. Elijah Arenas, the freshman, he missed the majority of the first half of the season. He is back now, but he has missed 17 games. Amarian Dickerson, another key transfer for them, he is out for the season. He has missed 14 games. Chad Baker-Mazara just got hurt. His timeline is TBD, so this doesn't even really include how much he's missed there, but that's going to continue to rack up for USC. Obviously, they've had an up and down season, but they have had to battle through so much. And actually, when this went out on social media, Eric Musselman quote tweeted my tweet of this graph with basically a peace sign and more or less said like, hey, we're doing the best that we can. So the funny thing about this, though, is it is not just USC. It is all of the West Big Ten teams. So Oregon, who has had horrible injury luck the last several years, comes in at second here. Jackson Shellstead has missed 10 games. He's likely out for the season. Nate Biddle, who is their other star player, he is now back healthy, but he missed 7 games. So when you combine the production from those two, they stack up at number 2, and they've obviously had a disappointing season. But once again, injuries have been a major issue there. Washington, also in the Big Ten, has missed a lot of games. I think they come in at 3rd here on this list. Hans Steinbach has missed 3 games. Wesley Yates has missed 6. Desmond Claude is likely done for the year. UCLA is a little bit lower in this, but they're also pretty high relative to most teams, and one of the highest teams, the highest injury rates for teams that are probably getting in the tournament or at least have a good case there. Missouri is another team that's pretty high. Some of these injuries were earlier in the year for them, but they've had to overcome that as well. Jaden Stone missed some time. Trent Pierce missed some time. And then some teams that have been pretty high in the injury rate that are likely not making the tournament, and maybe you can blame that as being a large part of it. Notre Dame, Minnesota, and Virginia Tech. But if you focus on likely or possible tournament teams, I think this is really interesting. So Alabama, Kentucky, and UCLA. Now, UCLA is not a lock to make the tournament by any means, but Alabama and Kentucky certainly are. They have had the highest overall production miss due to injury of all of those teams that are kind of in the tournament conversation. So, you can point to, especially, Kentucky's have been well documented, but Alabama has missed some key games from key players as well. And so they've had to overcome a lot, and that certainly should be taken into account when looking at their overall season. When we're talking about possible title contenders who have had to overcome injury, the main 3 are Kansas, Gonzaga, and UConn. Kansas, obviously, Darren Peterson. Gonzaga, I think the main thing is that Braden Huff, who has been one of their best players, a potential All-American candidate this year, has been out for a while, and it's still TBD on when he will be back, if he will be back this season. And then UConn also has struggled with injuries. Braylon Mullins had a lot of his season initially off the board when he was dealing with injury. And then it is really interesting to look at the teams who have been the best teams in the sport. Michigan, Arizona, Duke, Houston, and even Florida. All of them have had almost no injuries to speak of. And that really does go to show that sometimes it is the most healthy teams who are the best teams. And you can make an argument that all of those teams, the only way that they are in the top 5 this year in terms of their predictive metrics is because of how healthy they have been. And that some of these other teams might be in that spot if they had been more fortunate there. So, obviously there's only so much that you can do to prevent injury, but certainly this can have be a key factor for teams who are wanting to go deep in the tournament. And when we talk about who is going to be a national title favorite, win the whole thing this year, certainly those teams at the top, Michigan, Arizona, Duke, Houston, Florida, like they have been really healthy, and that has been a huge part of why they have been successful this year. So I thought that was very interesting to look at this week. Well, that is a wrap for our show today. I hope you enjoyed it. I had a lot of fun doing this with both Dauster and Eamonn Brennan joining me today. We'll be back next Tuesday for another weekly episode as we are gearing up towards March Madness. I cannot wait. I'm already planning what we're doing on this show to talk about the bracket and talk about the tournament once we get that sheet of paper with all those teams on it. This is an ad-free show, so please do the best that you can to help support the show by leaving us 5-star reviews on the Apple and Spotify podcast platforms, liking and subscribing on YouTube, leaving comments, sharing on social media. This really, really helps the show a lot. It has been really awesome to see. We've had a full month of the show now, and the reception has been really wonderful. So thank you again for being here today. It really means a lot to me, and I will see all of you guys next time.